Well, good morning and happy Monday, Rotary District 7770, and welcome to Conversations with Rotary Action People for Monday, August 3rd. My name is Don Hovis from the Rotary Club in Myrtle Beach. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about beer with a beer tasting expert, Troy Fedderson. Good morning, Troy.
Good morning. It's 8 a.m. here.
I was going to say, Troy is joining us today from Lafayette, California, where he is a member of the Lafayette Rotary Club, which is part of Rotary District 5160. Troy was a past assistant governor in his district from 2016 to 2018. Troy started brewing beer at home over 30 years ago and has been a certified beer judge for 10 years. You might have the best job in the world. And he is a lifetime member of Rotary's Brew Fellowship, which stands for Beers Rotarians Enjoy Worldwide. So welcome, Troy.
Thank you.
I will introduce our CWRAP team, our public image chair for our Rotary District. From the 5 Points Rotary Club in Columbia, Miss Mary Gass. Good morning, Mary. And our district communications officer, he's running the stream for us there from Somerville, and from the Somerville Evening Rotary Club, Mr. Terry Moore. Good morning, Terry. So if you have a question, we want you to use the chat box. Troy has sent over several questions of this topic, and I will get to those now. So, Troy, how did you get started brewing beer and in becoming a beer judge?
Yeah, I started when I was 18 or just before 18 years old in high school. I grew up in Napa, California, so a big wine producing region. They had a great fermentation supply store, Napa Fermentation Supplies, and I found out with a buddy from high school that, well, they would sell the ingredients to make beer to any teenager, really, and tell you how to make it. And it was perfectly legal, I suppose, because you were just getting the ingredients like grain and hops. And so I started making beer. It wasn't great. It was an extract beer. And I think I'll start by mentioning there's a natural progression. I start with home brewing because most people who get into being a beer judge, and they start as a home brewer. That's how the whole judging thing started, to provide feedback for home brewers. And there's a natural progression where you start making the extracts beer. It's very simple to make, and then you progress to making all grains beer from scratch and join a beer club. I had a neighbor that was making all grain beer. He got me more interested in it, from making just mediocre beer to making better beer. And then the beer club, you find a local beer club. We have a good one here, and a lot of them, I would say we had about 5 or 6 beer judges in the club, and it was encouraged to improve your brewing and the club's brewing. So that's how I got into becoming a beer judge, when I studied with some other people in the beer club. And that was a little over 10 years ago. Actually, maybe 12 years ago, 10 years ago, that I got certified.
That's pretty cool. How hard is it to learn to make a good beer at home? And what's involved for someone who may be thinking about making their own beer?
Yeah, it's not hard at all to make your own beer. Especially the way that I started, and most people start, it's called an extract beer. You basically get dried malt extract, or the liquidy syrup extract, and basically beer, which is malt and hops, and you add the water, you boil it up, and you let it boil with the hops, you cool it down, add yeast, let it ferment for a while, and that's about it. So anybody can make beer. I started in my kitchen. And then, as I mentioned, there's a natural progression where you'll end up, a lot of brewers, they get more into it, home brewers, and they want to make the beer better, different styles, and then they get more equipment and do the all grain brewing, where you're starting with the actual grain and you mash it. So maybe just I'll take maybe the 1 minute version on how you make the beer, whether it's in a brewery or at home. You have the grain, which you have to crack so that you can then steep it in hotter water called a mash, and then that will slowly drain. First of all, it converts the starches into sugars in the beer, and then you drain it slowly. It's almost like a tea where you're getting the sweetness and the liquid out of the grains. Then you boil that with the hops in order to get the bitterness out of the hops. And then it's much like if you were doing an extract beer, you cool it down, add the yeast, and then you carbonate it by putting it in a bottle with just a little bit more sugar for the yeast to work on to carbonate it naturally in the bottle. Or what a lot of brewers progress to is getting a kegging system, because then it's so much easier. You just hook up some CO2 to the keg, and you don't have to worry about the bottling part until you want to put it in a bottle. And there's no sediment at the bottom, because when you bottle your beer, you end up having a little bit of sediment at the bottom as the yeast drops out after it naturally carbonates the beer. So yeah, it's very easy to start brewing beer. And one thing I was surprised that I learned about my own neighborhood when I was brewing out in the driveway, and somebody came along and talked about how they made beer, and they knew somebody else on the same street that made beer. And the point is that there may be many people on your street who make beer and you just don't know it. It's become really popular. That we all probably know a lot of people that make beer, and it's always a good resource. There's a lot of resources out there in terms of other people. It's always fun to brew with somebody else if you're getting started. So yeah, if you like beer and you like to make your own beer, then it's something you could try making your own beer. But if you really want to get into it, it's like any hobby. You can take it to different levels.
So how do you judge beer?
Yeah, judging beer, and I'll mention again that the one of the reasons that you have the judging is to provide feedback to home brewers. So the Beer Judge Certification Program, it's called BJCP, Beer Judge Certification Program, and you can find a lot of information on their website at bjcp.org. But they have a whole program and testing in order to become certified as a beer judge. There's a written part to it, and there's a tasting part. So the written part, you have to know a lot about every beer style that's out there. They're categorized into different styles, and there's a style guideline. And since you're not just providing the feedback on each beer in terms of how good it is, you're also giving feedback to the brewer on how to make their beer better. So if you identify a flaw, you have to be able to know what they might have done in the brewing process and what to recommend to improve it. So there's a lot of the test is about how to brew. You have to be able to create a recipe for any type of beer they might give you. You have to go into detail about the different ingredients of the beer, as well as the different styles that you might be tasting and what is a good example or a bad example of each style. And then there is the actual tasting exam where you have to be able to successfully identify some of the flaws that are common in beer, and judge it on the scale, the 50-point scale that they use, and come within a certain number of points of other higher level judges that proctor it. So it's a process. It took me a couple of years and studying, and I think I underestimated at first the amount of work that it was going to be. I thought I knew quite a bit about beer before I started.
So what makes a beer bad, good, or great?
Yeah, it's a good question, because there's a lot of, I would say, subjectivity to it. Good beer is the beer you like. But then there's different beer styles, and so it's very much related to what kind of beer you're trying. So what makes a good stout is going to be different than what makes a good IPA, and it's based on what the historic and classic examples are of each style. So if you're doing a Irish stout, Guinness is for example is a classic example of that. So if you do a flawless example, you're not going to have any off flavors that shouldn't be there, and you're going to have certain times, some of it's an intangible quality that you get. What makes a good beer or a great beer, which is why one of the categories that we judge is the overall impression. And I'll mention that in beer judging, unlike wine judging, usually a wine judge will spit out the wine as they taste, because you can't taste too much with wine and stay sober. But with beer, with a little bit lower alcohol, you do drink a couple ounces or a few ounces, because you want to get the overall impression of how it drinks, the drinkability, the overall drinking satisfaction of it. So that there's certain intangible qualities as well. But I'll also mention that on a 50-point scale, you never get a 50. The highest beer I've ever scored was a 45. It's sort of the idea that there can always be something better. And the same beer can be very good or great or poor, depending on where you have it. Has it been sitting in your garage warm? Did you get it fresh at the brewery? It was one batch particularly special that the brewery made, even though they're all similar. But I'll come back to the answer that the greatest beer is the one that you like the most.
And what are some styles of beer that you like and a lot of people may not be familiar with?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different styles that you can find now that breweries are making that you couldn't find years ago. One, for example, it's called Goza. It's Gose. It's pronounced Goza. It's a little bit salty, enough you can taste, but not too salty. It's slightly sour, but not too sour, maybe like adding a little lemon to your iced tea. And sometimes it's got a little coriander or fruity flavor to it. A lot of breweries, you won't find it everywhere, but I've seen it quite a bit, and I'm sure you can find it around the area. So that's a refreshing beer in the summer, as is a Berliner Weiss, which is a lower alcohol, just slightly sour beer that's considered by many to be one of the most refreshing beers. I'm starting to get more into sour beers, and I really like the Flanders red ales from Belgium. One that you can probably get around there is a Rodenbach Grand Cru. If you are into just a slightly sour beer. And then a more normal beer, I think an interesting one is the smoked beers, the Rock beer. Schlinkerla is one that you can find at places that have a good selection of beer. Of course, there's IPAs in so many styles, and that seems to be the most popular style. We've gone through crazes of black or dark IPAs, the hazy IPAs now. So I just like to try different IPAs. It's such a wide variety, and I think it's still my favorite style. Sorry, Donald, I can't hear you. There you go.
What are ways you have seen Rotary clubs use beer for fundraisers and community events?
Yeah, and I can just speak to our district in Northern California, and I'm sure everywhere, in every district, that you see more opportunities there where people are using beer in their clubs for socially as well as for fundraisers. We've got a smaller club that's close to my house that they have a sister city with a town, Tabor in Czech Republic. Every 4th of July, there's a parade and they serve a special kind of Czech beer with it. So if you have exchange students or any international connection to a country that makes beer, you can use that as part of an international angle. And then there's festivals, of course, and Pints for Polio is something, Polio Day is October 22nd. And I already know that there's, if you were to look it up, Pints for Polio, there's a number of places that are having already scheduled for October 22nd this year, Pints for Polio. And I'll also mention that I grew up in Napa. There's more than one Rotary Club in Napa, the North Napa Club. They've been doing a competition. There's a really good beer brewer there. His name's Mike Riddle, and he started a keg competition where brewers, normally you would enter a competition by sending some bottles. With a keg competition, so it's a smaller keg for home brewers. You send in the keg. It's a sanctioned beer judge competition, and then the public comes and they get to have their People's Choice Award. So they get free beer from home brewers from the competition, and then they make money as having a competition of home brews. And it depends on the laws as well. Every place is different. In California now, we can actually do fundraisers where homebrewers serve beer and make money, whereas before there was a time we couldn't do that with the alcohol laws.
Yeah, you were talking about pints for polio, and I actually listened to a YouTube talk from LaShonda Delvick up in Lynchburg, Virginia area, and she talks about an event she started in her area called Pints for a Purpose, and it's for Polio Plus as well. So interesting. I haven't heard of any of those in our area, at least as of now. What are some resources for people who want to learn more about beer?
Yeah, I mentioned bjcp.org. That's the site. If you're interested in beer judging, that would be the place to go. But even if you just are interested in appreciating beer more, on the right side of their homepage, you can download the score sheet, which will tell you all the things on the left side that are descriptors that you could find in the beer and how to judge it, and the 5 categories of judging the beer: the aroma, the flavor, the appearance, the mouthfeel, the overall impression. I would also say that there's so many proliferation of breweries out there now that wherever you are, the home brewer, the brewers and the breweries locally are a great source to find new beers and learn about beers.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for answering those questions. I'm going to go to the chat box now because I have seen several questions come through here. So let's see here. We got another fellow Lifetime Brew member here in the Zoom call today. So what type of beer do you recommend for a first timer?
Well, that's an interesting question, because often the answer from the beers we're familiar with is you try a light American lager beer, something that's very plain, and those certainly don't have a lot of strong flavor or bitterness. But I've found that people who say they don't like beer, maybe it's often that they just haven't tried all the beers that are out there. And often when I hear people say that they like one beer that they found, but then generally they don't like beer, it's often a dark beer. So I suggest starting with some of the darker beers. They don't all have to taste like an ashtray if that's your impression of a stout. Some of them are very smooth. In Europe, they have the Schwartz beer. It's a lager. It's not really a stout, which is an ale. So some of the lager dark beers are actually quite smooth to drink, and it's a bit up in terms of if you don't like beer at all. But a lot of people I've found they like barrel aged beers. So if you have they're often stronger, like a barley wine, or I know Sierra Nevada, they can get those all throughout the United States now. They make some very good special barrel-aged beers, which if you don't like beers in particular, these can be pretty good. Sometimes they taste like a port or a certain liquors, some even if the stronger ones.
So what percentage of alcohol can beer have, and what is the alcohol percentage of your beer?
Well, the beer can range from just 2% alcohol or less, very light, to the standard would be maybe 5% alcohol is what a Budweiser is, and IPAs range from stronger 6.5% or 6% to 7.5%. Double IPAs, triple IPAs, usually you go up to maybe 11% alcohol, not stronger. but there are beers that are a higher alcohol. There have been beers 40% alcohol. There's a story about a beers competition that kind of went back and forth in terms of getting the strongest beer. So there's certainly a Guinness World Record that you can go for with beer, and you can also the yeast will only go so high before they can't produce more alcohol. But there's basically you end up you can make ice beer where you basically take ice when you freeze the beer, and that's not the alcohol isn't in the ice, so it makes the beer stronger. It's actually a form of distillation. You can make beers quite strong, but I think there's a certain level where they're just more harsh than say a strong wine. So the lighter the beer, the lower the alcohol needs to be to make it really palatable, in my opinion. The beers I brew fall within typically 5 to 6% alcohol, but I also like to make lighter beers just to drink. So when I don't want to drink and get the alcohol hitting me.
So when you're judging, how many beers do you have to taste before you get the beer buzz?
Ideally, you really don't. You're tasting a beer, drinking maybe 2 ounces of that beer, and you take about 10 minutes or more to judge that beer, because you're filling out a sheet and providing a feedback, detailed feedback about the beer. You're eating crackers, or they always give you different food, whether it's a breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on the timing. Sometimes you do start earlier in the morning with these. But yeah, the alcohol can hit you if you're not careful with it. But it's pace, and it's also trying not to drink too much. Sometimes there's a lunch, and they typically have different beers to try there, so you got to be careful you don't add to what you're already judging, because that's tempting. But the judging itself, you might sometimes get some of the feeling of it, a little bit of a buzz, but ideally you don't.
The next two are actually comments here. One is, we represent Blanco Labeling, a company that produces labels. We were at the Craft Brewers Association convention in DC 2 years ago, was amazed at the different flavors of beers. And then if you're on here and you're watching, someone has posted a question for everyone to answer via the chat of what is your favorite beer. This person suggests the Holy City Pluff Mud. All right, so how do you judge the right temperature to serve beer? In the UK, darker beers are often served at room temperature. I have never seen that in the US.
Yeah, the right temperature does vary by beer and tradition by region. So if you have an American lager, that should be cold. If ice cold is okay if you want something very refreshing, and that's the purpose. But if you want to get the flavor of the beer, if you're judging a American lager, you want to have it a little bit warmer. It might be 42 degrees Celsius, 42 degrees Fahrenheit instead of ice cold. And then when you say room temperature for British beers, it's actually not room temperature, it's cellar temperature. So, and that's changing as well. One example is the Guinness Stout. They used to drink that at cellar temperature, almost room temperature, and now it's served quite cold. I think Guinness recommends it at about 6 degrees Celsius or 42 degrees Fahrenheit. So it changes over time with taste, but the reason you don't drink it ice cold is that you just don't get as much of the flavor if you're really trying to get all the nuances of the flavor. But it comes down to what you like to drink for the beer. Heavier beers would be a little warmer, and lighter beers can be colder. But I think it's room temperature I don't know any beer that I really want to drink at room temperature.
Gotcha. The final question I see here is 3.2% beer still produced?
I'm sure it is, but here in California, you don't see it. So there's the laws, alcohol laws, as you know, vary by state and county. So there is a demand for 3.2 beers, but I think it's more where you still have beer laws that dictate it at certain times and places.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Troy, for joining us. Oh, one final thing here. Do you make beer cheese?
I don't, but beer pairs well with the cheese, as well as a whole nother topic of pairing beer with food. So I might end by mentioning that in addition to a beer judge, there's a whole certification process called a Cicerone, which is similar to a sommelier for wine, where you learn all about the history and stories of beer and how to pair it specifically with food, geared towards the serving industry.
All right. Let's see here. A couple questions just came in. Do you recall how many and which beers you have given scores of 44 or higher?
Yeah, I mentioned the top was 45 for me, and it was a pre-prohibition classic American Pilsner, which is very light, and I felt had to be very confident about giving it that, because you're always wondering, is it really me or is it the beer? So the point is that any style of beer theoretically could have a higher score. I think the other ones I've given a 44 to is a IPA, and I don't know about the exact scores, but I've given a number that are 40 or higher for sure, and those fall in a range of categories. I couldn't say a specific style.
Do you make any cask beers?
No, but our beer club does a barrel project, where they collaborate to put beer that they brew into a barrel. And that's very interesting. You can take any beer and add a little bit of barrel aging to it, or you can take any beer and add nitrogen to it, which is another twist, just like Guinness have the nitrogen fine bubbles.
Interesting. Someone posted a comment here that French's is now making a mustard beer. Thoughts?
Somebody told me that. My initial reaction is I don't think that mustard would go great with beer. Maybe on the hot dog with the beer, but there's a lot of interesting beer that's made with, for example, jalapenos or peppers. So I think I would reserve my judgment and try it, but it's not my first impression of what I would want mustard in my beer.
Do you have any opinion on the Chimay Blue Reserve?
The Chimay, they're all good. And I think in general, there's just an amazing number of great beers from Belgium. The darker styles are great, and the lighter golden styles and the Trappist ales. So I love Chimay. We did a Rotary brew tasting. We tasted Duvel, a Belgian golden strong ale. I like Arval as well, which is a little bit of a rounded bottle, and they have some of these very perfumey, almost this one a lavender type of a flowery character to it, very delicate. But I like all the Chimays.
Have you ever judged any bourbon barrel beers?
Yes, I think that's a style that's caught on in recent years. Very good with stouts or darker beers. Sometimes you don't have to be too boozy, but there's a characteristic of it. If you like bourbon, it's just some of these are amazing. So I do know that's another category that I've given a high score to a couple times. Excuse me. And sometimes I think higher scores, they gravitate towards bigger beers and bigger flavors, even though theoretically any beer style can get a high score. Bourbon barrel aged beers tend to often score high when they're done well. just because there's just a lot of flavor, and they're very, very popular. If you like bourbon, it just adds something to a dark beer to have the bourbon barrel aged. So you can seek those out. I'm sure you can find them in just about any market. You go to a bottle shop, and sometimes they're not year round. But if you haven't tried a bourbon barrel aged stout, put it on your list.
I'll say, if anyone ever wants to drink and you don't want to drive, you can call me, because I'll be the Rotary District's DD, because I don't drink at all. So all of this is kind of foreign to me. And with that being said, we want you to bring your favorite beer to our happy hour, which happens on the third Thursday. I believe this will be August 20th at 5 o'clock. So we want you to bring your favorite beer on the third Thursday, August 20th at 5 o'clock. Troy, thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Donald. Having fun.
So I want to start by saying, you may think I'm like wearing a baseball jersey. I am wearing a Rotary baseball jersey. If you remember back to the all club call on Wednesday, Tiffany Irvin, our Rotary geek, had the baseball jersey in her background, and it's a fundraiser for CART. They're only $20. It's got the number 20 on the back. It's got the Rotary Master Brand logo on one sleeve. It's got the CART Fund logo on the other sleeve. Really nice. It came really fast, but I will tell you, they run small. So if you want one, I would order one size larger than you need. And if you want to order them, it's Tiffany Irvin, ERVIN.com. When you get to the website, click shop. $20, really cool. I might wear this for every call. This might be my uniform now, my baseball uniform for CWRAP. So thanks again, Troy.
Thanks, Donald.
You can also get these from Billy Black.
Where's your, I don't see your picture here. Let me try it. What'd you share?
So you can also get these from Billy Black, the baseball jerseys.
Oh, cool. Same one?
That's where I got mine.
Excellent. I like your shirt too there, Johnny. That looks pretty good. You're wearing Rotary. I love it.
Pauline, see this right here, right? The best year.
You would mean the best year before my year? Yeah, that's correct.
Troy, thank you very much. We enjoyed that. Good presentation.
You're welcome.
I will conclude with the Rotary four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? In closing, if you're around the coastal areas of South Carolina, hope you're preparing for Isaias, and hope we don't lose power tonight. And we'll be back to a brighter, beautiful day tomorrow. We hope to see you on Wednesday of this week. Many of you know our speaker and had the chance of meeting him in Hilton Head at the district conference there. Mr. Haresh Ramchandi will be with us on Wednesday for the All Club Call at noon. And then one final announcement for Friday. If you're watching us on Facebook right now, Friday we will not be on Facebook. We will not also record Friday's topic and the speaker. The speaker has requested no recordings and no postings. So please know, if you want to hear the speaker on Friday at 11, you need to log in through Zoom. Hope everyone has a wonderful Monday. See you on Wednesday. That's a wrap for Conversation with Rotary Action People for Monday, August 3rd. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Troy.